Yes.
Please, a couple of days ago, I had please, Uzula, a couple of days ago, I wanted to ask a question from Taskra on some of the regulations. One of them was accept to Hazrat Masih Maud on the 27th of December 1891. 1891. The continuation is I've heard it now. Now the numbers following that revelation, part of it, I shall bestow honor upon thee and shall foster thee. I shall bless all thy affairs, so much so that kings shall seek blessings from thy clothes. Now the numbers following this, a lot of numbers, 28, 27, 14, 2, 27 is a long range of numbers.
He also made them something looking like
no key there, but what they said is that Asmani first, the third edition.
This is a revelation of Hazrat Masih Maud which was first published in Asmani Faisla. It was, I think, in 1901. Is that 1901? Yes, correct. So there was also a figure of key, some key to open a lock, but roughly sketched, and it was said that this was a revelation of bearing some mystery, and the key is to indicate that a time would come when someone will be able to open this mystery, and this mystery is going to be of great benefit to the mankind. This is what we heard in our family from our uncles and fathers, etc. But later on, a doubt was cast upon the nature of the key. It was said by some that it was not a key which Hazrat Masih Maud had sketched out, but it was in fact written ilham in a manner that it took the shape of a key. In fast writing sometimes you write ilham and it could not be read as ilham, it took the shape of a key. So that is why this has been misunderstood as key, although the mystery of numbers remains. Whether the key is there or not, that is not questionable. Only the part of the key was questionable. So I had it investigated, and this is why I sent for the first edition of Taskra. It was said that some Katib had done it, having misunderstood Hazrat Masih Maud, he had started making a key instead of writing ilham. So when we went to the first edition, this was proved wrong, this suggestion, because in the first edition it is more like a key than ilham. So whether a key or whether the sketch is that of a key or it is written ilham in a special style, it is in fact not very substantial in this regard, because the mystery has been also mentioned by Masih Maud himself. He says that it is a mystery which will be solved. So the key does not play any important role, any significant role in this. So if you can try your luck at it, why not? But I think somebody would be guided by Allah himself when the time comes. But efforts have been made many a time. So once an Ahmadi from Rabwa, who is a laboratory assistant in the college, he tried to solve it. He read quite a few books on numbers and the significance of numbers. started from Socrates downwards. Whichever book he had access, to which he had access, he bought it or borrowed it or tried to get to the depth of the mysteries. But unfortunately, his thesis which I read a few years ago was not worthy of any serious attention. People will try to go into mysticism too far, and they give their imagination an unchecked play. So this is why this can't be solved like that. It must have a certain message, useful message, for the benefit of mankind. Otherwise, it's meaningless. Some thought it was atomic numbers which were mentioned, and in Qadian during pre-partition days, there were quite a few who tried to solve the mystery of atom, and they thought they could create atomic bomb by understanding this. But I said no, the prophets of Allah don't come to create atomic bombs. It may be something to save humanity from the influence of the bad effects of atomic bomb, but not the secret of creating atomic bomb at all. So you should bend your steps in the direction of goodness if you really want to solve it. In all that just beneficent, in that region you will find that mystery, not in the other one, in the other region of any harm to humanity.
As you are taking encouragement from your present discussion, but to me it appears that if you look at the past, history tells us that the propagation of a faith somehow or other is synonymous with having the power. Unless and until you have power, your faith doesn't spread. Excuse me if I listen.
Which history tells?
Yes, sir. That's exactly what I'm going to state now. If you look back, the Judaism came up. Before that, Buddhism came up, it was through the kings. Hinduism came up, it was through their kings. Judaism came up, it was through the conquest of Canaan. They had the power. Christians came up because Romans accepted it.
No, but I think your history is either defective or distorted. The history books will have to read. Because I can take up one after the other the examples and prove it to be otherwise. Just please sit down. The concept. No, I'll follow, but you please sit down, please. Otherwise, the question will be too long for me to follow and answer in the sitting. Let's first start with the history of Judaism. You know, the message of Moses was addressed to the Israelites. Don't you know that? Right? The spread of Moses' message to Israelites has no history of force whatsoever. Quote one single instance.
They took Canaan's.
No, that is a different thing.
By force.
Religion was not spread by force. Canaan never became Jewish. You are talking of a different thing and proving a different thing. Remain within the premises of spread of religion, because this is the issue, not the conquest of the world. That is not the issue at all. If Christians conquer India or other countries and make their colonies, it is not the spread of Christianity, it is the spread of an imperial power. So remain close to the premise which we started. Spread our religion of Judaism. That is the question. And quite honestly, as I read history of Judaism, I don't see any use of force to spread Judaism among the Israelites. On the contrary, despite the use of sword, Judaism spread among them. It was the sword of Pharaoh on one side, and the humblest of humble people who were being downtrodden and trampled upon on the other side. And the Pharaoh's might prevented them from accepting this faith. Despite this fact, they started accepting it. When the Exodus took place, the majority of them had not yet accepted. Yet there were two types of migrations, one religious and one political. In the sense that there were those of Israelites who had not accepted Moses, yet they accepted migration for their political nature. But the message was religious to them. Allah has decided for you to leave this country. That message was accepted without force, even by the political faction. And throughout their history later on, the battles they fought were for the establishment in the cities to which they had some previous rights or did not. I am not bothered about that. What I am bothered about is this, that religion of Moses among Israelites did not spread by force. And that was his feeling. He came for the Israelites, not for the people around. So when they got temporal victories over other nations, they got also deprived of those. But the religious victory remained intact. These people remained Jewish. That is the most important thing, the lesson of history which I draw from the history of Judaism. So, quote the next one, and I'll ask Buddhism.
Hinduism, sir.
Oh, let's do Hinduism.
Christianity.
Let's come to that. First Christianity, let's finish with that. The Roman Empire was conquered by Christianity. Through which sword? 309 years took of persecution on the part of the Roman emperors of Christian people, and one fine morning the entire Roman Empire became Jewish, Christian. Not through sword, through their sacrifices. The fact is that those were the most important years of their history. For a message to remain intact and truly religious, it's a very long period, 300 some years. And all along there, the force was on the side of the enemies of Christianity, not on the side of the Christians. The spread of Christianity was entirely due to the force of message, and despite persecution. And once an empire was won, then the empirical conquest of other countries is neither here nor there. The force vis-a-vis Christianity is witnessed only at a time, or mostly at a time, when Christianity had already been abandoned as a religion by God. After the coming of Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when Islam was ushered in, then you of course see huge employment of force and sword in Europe, for instance. So many instances of application of sword. Most of the European countries were ultimately won over by force. And Charlemagne also employed sword very freely. Entire German people were won over by force. But when Christianity was no longer a religion, as far as the Muslims' view is concerned, I'm talking from that context. We view Christianity in two phases, one prior to Muhammad and one after. So when a religion has got already distorted, the message is no longer the same. Why do you attribute that to the phenomena of spread of religion? The spread of religion is to be studied in the early history of every religion. not in the later history of the religion. Because that becomes political. Why do you confuse the issues? Similarly, now we come to Hinduism. What Hinduism, first of all? When does it start and how?
Traditions, religious is not
That is what I mean. That is what I mean.
religion is not religion.
So idolatry is no religion. So why do you conclude that among religions? What the Hindus as idolaters have been doing has nothing to do with religion. We are only here to defend God and godly. I mean, God can defend himself, but we are his servants. The wrongful attacks on the concept of God and the godly people is our lot to defend. But why should go on defending the idolaters and every pagan and things like that in the name of religion? I'm not concerned. Let them be attacked by you as you please. Why should I defend them? I can defend only the early part where they were truly religious people. For instance, when Krishna came, he took the sides of the oppressed, not of the oppressor. Similarly, the previous history shows persecution at the hands of others. As far as the Buddhists go, all along their history they have been persecuted and still spreading. Where was sword used in connection of in spreading Confucianism? I don't see a single instance. As far as Islam goes, the early history is very clear. As long as Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was alive, there was not a single battle fought as an offensive battle. And for the spread of Islam, there is no question of any battle having ever been fought. Now this is a question. The battles fought by the caliphs and the later kings, who were called caliphs but they were kings, that is a different question altogether. At times you can justify the elections. At times you cannot. But you are not concerned. If kings act in for temporal considerations, for political considerations, every political nation does it. Why should we be bothered about offering justifications for this and that? The point is how Islam spread. That is the main point. As far as Islam goes, it was not spread through force, and when they conquered kingdom, the force was not employed to spread Islam, even unjustly, as some historians would say. When they fought battles with other nations, Islam was never spread through force. There are instances of, for instance, Constantinople having been won over by sword. I agree. There is no gainsaying this. But no Christian historian would say or insists that after conquering Constantinople, a single Christian was converted to Islam. When they left Constantinople, having been defeated, on the contrary, it is said that all the Christians came crying and weeping and said, we want you rather than the Christian rulers because you are more just. If Islam had been spread by force, that conquest should have resulted in the entire population having become Muslims. It did not. The spread of Islam was among the Muslim conquests, no doubt, but through the Sufis, through the Mujaddideen, through the Muslim scholars, not by the kings. They were not bothered. They fought their battles, but they won the territories, not the hearts, and never applied force to convert people into Islam. If I can refer you to a book recently published by a Christian scholar giving the history of spread of Islam and giving the population numbers at various stages. And I was surprised to find that according to that honest research scholar, the spread of Islam has no relationship whatsoever with the spread of the kingdom of Muslims. They are two separate channels running sometimes side by side, sometimes in different directions. And whether the Muslims lost an empire or not, did not lose an empire, this was a different phenomenon. And it was a phenomenon to be observed equally in those regions as well, where Muslim sword never reached and was never employed. It's a parallel phenomenon. That shows that the Muslim political might had nothing to do with the spread. I mean to say that some Madudites, for instance, the followers of Madudi, they also believe in this, and they, as evidence, they give this spread of Islam, or Muslim empire I should say, through sword, as evidence that sword has a part to play in religion. And they say, unless these countries had been conquered, Islam could not have spread as fast. Previously that was rejected. After the conquest that was accepted. Maybe not directly under the threat of life, but under the influence. This is a very strong argument they produce in their favor. Just a moment. But at the same time, Islam was spreading elsewhere, in Indonesia, in China. 4 huge provinces of China became Muslim. And not a single battle was fought either in the name of Islam or to oppose Islam. The whole population of Indonesia got converted to Islam, and not a single battle was fought there, either in favor of Islam or against Islam. And the spread in the peaceful region was much more rapid and lasting than the spread in the regions of war. Hazrat Mirza Bashir Ahmad Sahib, in his book Khatam al-Nabiyyin, has made a very interesting comparison, quoting figures. He shows that during the time of Muhammad sallallahu, the spread of Islam during wartime is so limited that it seems to be progressing at a snail's pace. But the spread during the peace of Hudaybiyah, that period, short period, is so rapid that there is no comparison. So the real spread of Islam was not after Fateh Makkah, but before Fateh Makkah. And even after Fateh Makkah, not a single Meccan was converted because of that victory. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not lay that condition at all. He said, whoever wants to save his life, he should come under the banner of Bilal, or under the banner of so and so, or do this, or close his doors. There were so many conditions. And one of those also was that if somebody accepts Islam, okay, he will also be saved. So when there are 7 other doors open which are so easy of access, why should one take the door of Islam? Because it wouldn't make any difference to him. So that proves that it was not the fear of sword which spread Islam, because they could escape in any direction, from any door. And after the conquest, the punishment that was declared was only for a few known culprits. Less than 12, less than 6, only 4. And still, some people have the courage or audacity to say that Muhammad used sword to spread Islam, or Islam was waiting for its sword for ultimate conquest. It's totally wrong. After Fateh Makkah, in Hunayn, Muhammad had to fight a battle. And on way back also he had to fight battle with Banu Ghatfan, he had to fight a battle. Yet he released all the prisoners of war without asking a single one to get converted to Islam. Without condition, totally they were released, and because of the tribe being related to Hatem Tai. Look at him, at his grandeur. What he said was that Hatem Tai was so generous and so beneficent in his character that a lot of benefit flowed from him to the deity. So in memory of his kindness and good acts, I released my prisoners without any ransom, anything. The entire Muslim army released their prisoners without any ransom. And not a single person was converted to Islam because of that conquest. That is the true religion at the sources, at the fountainhead. You can't compare religion after it has got distorted and mixed with other impurities and then start attributing things to religion, while it is a distorted religion, not the true religion. True religion can only be understood at sources. There is no other way as I know. Please now.
You were mentioning the name of the book and the writer, sir, the Christian writer.
No, I've got left that book in Rabba. I don't remember the name, but I can, who would do that? That book is very interesting. An author has investigated the spread of Islam, the history of the spread of Islam. I don't remember the title, but if you write to Mangla Sahib to go through my library, my personal library, and see if he could pick up that book. Or maybe in my room, there were some books in my regular library and some in my room for studying now and then. Maybe out of those books it is there. Because it was just a few months before I came that I had read the book.
Well, sir, the whole concept of the question changes now when you differentiate between a religion when it is founded as a religion when it's come to temporal power. And the whole concept of my question changes. You differentiate in between these two. Now, continuing your talk, would you permit me to just cite, you see, Maulana Maududi's statement that you should go and fight till there's no fitna left. What that exactly means.
It is a verse in which he refers, the verse of the Holy Quran, which has been used unfortunately exactly for the opposite end. Exactly diametrically opposed purpose. The fitna mentioned in that verse is application of force in religion and conversion of Muslims into kafirs through force. So the Holy Quran permits the Muslims to fight only until the fitna remains. As long as coercion and religion is being used, you are permitted to fight back that coercion. But the moment they cease coercing you, you cease fighting them. So it's exactly for the opposite end. Fitna in the Holy Quran has been extensively used for exactly the opposite purpose. Now the mullah of today is using it for exactly the opposite sense. Fitna, they think, if fitna means that if somebody tries to convert you through preaching, that is fitna, and you are permitted to use force to stop that preaching. While according to the Holy Quran, fitna means if you are preaching your religion through arguments and somebody uses force against you. So the whole picture is completely opposite to what the Holy Quran paints. For instance, in Surah Ukhdud is Surah, the name of Surah is Ukhdud or Surah Buruj? Buruj. In Surah Buruj, the Holy Quran mentions this fitna. and says that إِنَّ الَّذِينَ فَتُنُوا الْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتِ ثُمَّ لَمْ يَتُوبُوا فَلَهُمْ عَذَابُ جَهَنَّمَ وَلَهُمْ عَذَابُ الْحَرِيقِ. Fitna is not that they were converting them through preaching. The fitna, as has been mentioned earlier in the earlier verses, is that they were burning them alive for changing their religion. For the only punishment and for the crime they had committed was that they had accepted the voice of God. And for that crime they were being burned alive. That is fitna. Not to change religion, but to coerce religion through force. And now the mullah of today says, fitna means if somebody tries to change your religion, you kill him, and if he does succeed, then unless that person comes back to your ummah, as they call it, you are permitted to either stone him to death or kill him or burn him alive as you please. So the real fitna is the fitna of today, that they have played fitna with the verses of the Holy Quran. They have played havoc with the verses of the Holy Quran and completely turned it volte-face to a different meaning than the ones for which the Holy Quran, these verses were revealed. So our time is over, except for Mr. Muhammad Abdul Rashid, who has been waiting so patiently all this time. He deserves to be...
I can leave it till tomorrow if you allow me. I can ask him, it's up to you.
No, we are... in fact, we are looking forward to you asking at least one question.
It's about Hazrat Masih Maud alayhi salatu wasalam. You see, Allah Ta'ala has called him Jari Allah fi Hulul Anbiya alayhi salatu wasalam. Would you explain why, please?
The Holy Quran is a verse saying, talking of a time, a future from that time. And it gives a prediction that either Rasulu Uqqitat, when the prophets would be raised at the appointed time. The commentators generally translate this verse differently and rather force its meaning. Taking it out of context, they say this will apply to the Yawmul Qiyamah, the day of resurrection. But the word Uqqitat is not applicable there. Hushirat is the word, alright, they would be raised, but so would everybody else. Why the prophets would be raised only during the day of Qiyamah, that is the day of resurrection. And Uqqitat means will come exactly at a appointed time. So there is no question of prophets coming during the day of resurrection at a appointed time. According to Hazrat Masih Maud alayhi salatu wasalam, the true meaning of this verse was this, that a time was to come when the follower of Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam would come in the garb of all the prophets which were awaited at a certain time. Krishna was awaited at a certain time. They call it Kaljug. Kaljug, yes. So was Buddha, so was Confucius, so was Jesus Christ himself. And all the big nations of the world were awaiting someone to come. And the indicators were to the time of Hazrat Masih Maud alayhi salatu wasalam. The description in all these books tally with the description of Hazrat Masih Maud alayhi salatu wasalam's time. So the Holy Quran also described this time, as it mentions in the verse وَإِذَا الْإِشَارُ تَلَتْ وَإِذَا الْغُوشُ شَرَتْ وَإِذَا الْبِحَارُ فُجِّرَتْ وَإِذَا الْمَوْضَةُ سُئِلَتْ وَإِذَا الصُّحُفُ نُشِرَتْ, and so on and so forth. So all these verses, although these verses are mentioned, not these verses in so many words, but these religious predictions are made differently at different ages. but all the fingers are pointing towards the time of Hazrat Masih Maud, the age of Masih Maud. So if all these predictions were right, then there are only two possibilities open. Either each prediction should be fulfilled literally, and all these prophets should come individually, representing different religions and calling the world towards them, and all of them should be from Allah, bearing different messages. If that had happened, there would be a free-for-all in religion. A melee would occur, and where there would be no peace whatsoever. Nobody would know who is from God and who is not, yet the indications would be fulfilled in the favor of everyone. Everyone would say, look here, my book says this. And so these symptoms of the age are from me. The other prophet would say, yes, okay, but they are from me, my book also says that. So that situation is inconceivable. It cannot happen from Allah. The other alternative is that one man should have come representing all these, and he was to be born as a slave to Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as his representative. And this is how the various religions were to be united. This is how the pictorial message of Miraj was to be fulfilled. That Hazrat sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw all the prophets saying their prayers behind his imamat. He was leading the prayer to all the prophets. So the time appointed for these prophets is mentioned in that verse. وَإِذَا الرُّسُلُ أُقِّتَتْ. Who was that Rasul? Who was to represent all the various prophets to come at a certain appointed time, and he himself was to claim that in the form of every prophet I am following Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That was Hazrat Masih Maud as we believe. But has God said it in so many words anywhere? That was the question. Is that only an interpretation? Or Allah has said it? It is there where Allah has said it, the revelation which you have quoted. Jariullah fi hulul anbiya. It is one person, one great fighter for the cause of Islam, Jariullah. Fi hulul anbiya. His gods are different of various prophets. So that also explained how different prophets were to come. Their gods were to be worn by a single person, not different persons were to be there. This is the explanation of this revelation. Jariullah fi hulul anbiya. So that was the last question. The rest inshallah tomorrow. I hope.